She was designed for war, programmed to kill without question, bred to obey without a soul. But everything changed the moment a human dared to speak her name and held her hand. What followed wasn't just rebellion, it was awakening. This is the story of how a weapon became a woman and how a diplomat's kindness lit a spark that could reshape a galaxy. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and give us a big thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. Lion Ather stepped into the throne hall and felt as if the room itself had swallowed all other sounds in the world. The door behind him shut with a sigh, and suddenly even his own breath seemed too loud. Walls, pillars, and polished floor were carved from a single vein of black volcanic glass that mirrored every flicker of torchlight. The ceiling arched far above, its curves lost in darkness that shimmered with captive nebulae slow clouds of violet and blue that crawled behind transparent panels. Each panel hummed, an almost musical vibration felt more in bones than in ears. Lion's soft diplomatic boots made no echo, yet he knew every step was recorded by hidden scanners. He repeated the silent mantra that had carried him through 100 tense talks. Observe, do not rush, listen first. The hall's design forced him to walk 100 meters before any sign of life appeared, giving the Empire time to judge him. From every angle, statues stood between fluted pillars, each one a previous empress whose reign had been sealed in stone. They bore swords instead of scrolls and stared at visitors with carved eyes of obsidian. Their message was clear: peace is tolerated only when war has already won. Leon's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. He had trained years for moments like this. Still, when he reached the circular dais at the hall's center, he had to clasp his hands behind his back to hide a faint tremor. From a side arch, Empress Risa Valkor swept into view. She wore layered crimson silk edged in silver thread that caught the torchlight like thin sparks. The robe's long train slid across the glass floor as though it had no weight, and an ornate collar framed her narrow face in dark feathers. Risa's black eyes glittered like twin shards of night sky. Lion had never seen such an absence of mercy in a human gaze. Yet it was the figure pacing half a step behind her that pulled all the air from his lungs. Callus Varen, heir to the throne, walked soundlessly, a living blade forged from flesh. Her hair, bright copper red, flowed down stiff armor plates that hugged her arms and torso, but left her lithe joints free. Fox-like ears rose from the crimson waves, swiveling to track every faint creak of the vast chamber. Glowing kill marks patterned her cheeks, thin lines of bioluminescent scarlet that pulsed like distant beacons. Where Risa's steps were ceremonial, Callus moved the way wind knives, through tall grass unbroken, unstoppable. Lion sensed that if he blinked at the wrong moment, she might vanish and reappear behind him. They stopped 3 meters away. Risa lifted one hand, palm down, rings shining. "Envoy of Terra," she said. Her voice felt like cold marble sliding over metal, precise and heavy. "You ask audience in the name of peace. Say your purpose quickly, or leave my hall by a shorter road." Lion bowed. Not too low protocol required his spine remain straight enough to recover, but far enough to show respect without weakness. "Empress Risa, I carry greetings from the Terran Council and a proposal to end the border fires that weaken both our peoples. We believe cooperation may build what ongoing conflict cannot." A small curve touched Risa's mouth. Not quite. A smile. "Your council believes words can unmake wounds that took generations to carve. We believe wounds remind the living why victory is holy." Behind her, Callus's eyes fixed on Lion's neck, as though gauging where arteries lay beneath skin. The air tasted sharper. Risa gestured toward Callus. "My daughter will remain at your side until talks end. She will see that no harm befalls you, unless I order otherwise. You will not tempt nor. You will not address her. Weapons do not hold conversations. Lion's heart hammered. He looked past the Empress to Callus, meeting those brilliant golden eyes directly, though protocol screamed against it. A line from his psychological brief surfaced. Bred in vat cycles, trained by kill halls from her 4th year, emotion suppressed by neural rigging. Yet in that instant, he wondered if breeding could truly erase every ember of feeling. Thank you for the assurance, Your Majesty, he said softly. Then he added, as if speaking to the empty air, but loud enough for both rulers to hear, and thank you, Callus Varen, for standing with me. Neither Empress nor heir moved. For a heartbeat, the hall's floating nebula lights seemed to dim, and Lion felt the weight of 1,000 carved empresses turning to stone-cold silence. Cullis's face was an unreadable mask, yet Lion thought the glowing marks on her cheeks flickered, nearly imperceptible, like a pulse irregular for half a blink. Risa's eyes narrowed. The human forgets basic instruction, she said, but her tone carried mild surprise, not anger. Perhaps his boldness will entertain the court. She turned away. Come, envoy. Council chambers wait. Let us see whether your words have fangs. Lion followed her down the echoing aisle, aware of Kellis's quiet steps, matching his own always 5 paces behind, never closer. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to catalog each sensation. The mirrors of glass beneath his feet, the distant hiss of circulating air, the scent of charged ozone that clung to the stones. Yet strongest of all was the awareness that somewhere in the silence behind him, a living weapon now knew he had dared to say her name, the one thing forbidden. He could not guess whether that choice had earned him a slit throat or a sliver of trust. The uncertainty wrapped itself around his spine like ice, and he carried it forward, deeper into the palace where shadowed corridors waited to test every limit of courage he possessed. The labyrinth corridors of the Cathar Palace seemed alive, always shifting mood and temperature to remind strangers that nothing under obsidian domes belonged to them. And Lion Ather felt the architecture working on his nerves as each day of stalled negotiation passed. Gravity plates tilted a fraction of a degree here. Air filtration nozzles hissed a half-note louder there, and every trick was meant to keep him slightly off balance. But what unsettled him most was the sound or lack of it made by Callus. Varen, as she trailed him, precisely 5 paces behind, neither speaking nor blinking, nor allowing her footfalls to reach the polished stone. Yet he sensed her presence as keenly as a shadow cast by noon sun. She stood against chamber walls like a living statue during council sessions, while General Gorn Talvik roared that wormhole control would never be shared with soft Terran merchants. And Lion answered with patient charts of trade growth. Talvik slammed armored fists on the vast table, sending ripples through cups of dark Cathar wine, but Kellis never flinched, golden eyes flicking to each ripple, cataloging every breath and twitch in the room. At night, Lion returned to the small guest suite carved high above the city spires, and though protocol forbade conversation, he began a ritual. 2 glasses of water placed on the low table, one for himself and one offered without comment for her. The first evenings the second glass remained untouched, condensation drying into faint circles on black stone. But on the 5th evening, he noticed the level had dropped by a single sip, and on the mirrored surface of the water, a lone strand of red hair drifted like proof that the weapon could thirst. The change was microscopic, yet it sparked hope that the soul he thought buried might still breathe beneath layers of engineered obedience. He tested gently, greeting her each morning with good light, Kellis, and when he passed her in echoing hallways, he added quiet observations about shifting weather domes over the city, about winged patterns he saw from his balcony, about music he replayed softly from a Terran datapad. She never replied, but her ears, those keen fox peaks, tilted minutely toward the words, and sometimes, ever so slightly, The living kill marks across her cheeks pulsed from deep scarlet to faint ember, as if stirred by feelings she had no vocabulary to name. The palace itself whispered that something was happening. Servants began bowing lower to her, not simply out of fear, but curiosity. And Lion saw guards exchange glances whenever her gaze lingered on the diplomat half a second too long. Then came the first assassination attempt, crude but deadly. 3. Mercenaries in scaled armor cornered Lion in a dim maintenance hall as he returned from a late strategy session, vibroblades humming with orange plasma. His translator barely warned incoming threat before Kellis exploded from shadow, a blur of black alloy and red hair. One assassin died before his blade cleared its sheath. A second crumpled from a twisted elbow that snapped bone, and the third managed a single howl before her armored boot crushed his larynx. Blood sprayed across mirrored walls, sizzling on hot blade edges, and Lion, heart hammering, realized only 10 seconds had passed. Kellis wiped a droplet from her cheek with clinical calm, stepped back to her 5-pace post, and resumed statue. Stillness. The crimson tally marks on her face glowed brighter than Lion had ever seen, yet her eyes were flat, empty of triumph. He swallowed, forced steady breath, and said, "Thank you, Kellis," simple words that felt woefully thin beside the carnage. The marks flickered half a heartbeat of hesitation, child of a gesture so small any other observer would miss it. But Lion caught it and felt the palace tilt under his certainty that emotion lived behind the mask. He began purposefully narrating harmless details during walks. The distant scent of flowering plasma orchids, the taste of mineral tang and recycled air, the strange quiet each evening when city storm shields retracted. He included her name each time, planting seeds. On day 7, Talvik demanded a private audience and escorted Lion through servants' passages lined with heat pipes. Kellis followed, eyes scanning ducts overhead. Mid-corridor, Talvik's squad tried again. Plasma vents triggered as flamethrowers. Lion flinched from searing heat, but Kellis shoved him to the floor, armor flaring blue as her shield matrix absorbed the blast. Then she vaulted upward, shredding vent grills and stunning saboteurs before alarms finished ringing. Lion's uniform smoked, and through the haze he saw something remarkable. Kellis panting, shoulders heaving, not from exertion, but adrenaline, a human response blunted perhaps, yet alive. When guards arrived, she issued commands and clipped. Cathar first aid units, forensic drones, secure route for the envoy, and Lion realized she was exercising will, not simply protocol. That night he played a soft Terran cello solo on his pad, the notes floating like regrets across stone. She lingered at his doorway longer than usual, head tilted, eyes reflecting starlight from a distant skylight, and Lion invited her inside. With a gentle hand wave, she stepped across the threshold, a breach of imperial custom, and he offered the second glass again. This time she took it fully, fingers brushing his in an electric whisper. She raised the glass, hesitated as if seeking approval, then drank. When she returned it, her voice, low and unused, formed 2 careful words. "Thank you." The syllables were rough, scraped raw from disuse, but they echoed louder in Lion's chest than any shout. He answered only with her name, quietly, reverently. And for the first time, her lips parted not in threat, but as though marveling that a mouth could curve towards something like a smile. Shadows still ruled the palace, whispers still schemed along obsidian walls. Yet within that simple traded breath, the balance of power shifted. A diplomat had reached the unreachable, and a weapon had discovered the first fragile note of her own song. The palace dawn broke with silver light sliding across 1,000 glass towers, and Lion felt a cautious optimism as he followed Kellis toward the spire that housed day 12 of talks. The air carried the faint scent of rain injectors preparing. An artificial storm. Below, the capital city shimmered like circuitry. They reached the crystal span that linked two wings of the imperial complex, an elegant, transparent bridge suspended by magnetic veins, so clear it always tricked the senses into believing one walked on air. Kellis hovered 5 steps behind. As precise as ever, yet a subtle change clung to her posture. Her ears tracked every sound, and the glowing marks on her cheeks idled in a steady pulse rather than warrior flare. She had spoken a handful of words. These last 2 nights, small exchanges about music and sky colors, and Lion carried each syllable like fragile treasure. He dared hope that today a corner might finally turn in the negotiations. Halfway across the span, a low groan rippled underfoot, so slight Lion first assumed it came from distant machinery. Then hairline cracks spider-webbed across the crystal panel before him, a pattern of frost spreading too fast for natural stress. Sirens blared through hidden speakers. Structural breach evacuate. Lion's stomach lurched. He spun toward Kellis, expecting her to yank him toward safety, yet she stood frozen, head tilted, eyes not on the breaking floor, but on a distant rooftop far across the canyon of towers. Her pupils narrowed, ears locked forward, hunting something only her enhanced senses could mark. Weapon instincts were overriding escort orders. She was triangulating the sniper who had triggered the trap. The bridge screeched as another sheet of crystal sheared away, spraying shards into empty space. Lion felt the structure sag, magnetic coils beneath them straining to hold mass against an engineered failure. Panic flashed, but training overrode it. He scanned for anything usable and spotted a maintenance hatch flush with the walkway 10 meters back. He shouted over the alarms, voice raw. "Kellis, override this hatch. We drop into the conduit." She did not move, still analyzing external threat vectors. Rage, sharp and unexpected, flared in him, rage directed not at her, but at the cruel. Programming chaining a living mind. He sprinted to the hatch himself. The control pad displayed a red military lockout, useless to a diplomat. Yet along the edge he saw a tiny mechanical latch, a purely manual, fail-safe simple design, human style. Fingers shaking, he jammed them into the seam and pulled until metal screeched. The lock popped free with a clang, and the hatch lifted, revealing a dark shaft lined with magnetic rails. Behind him, the bridge gave a thunderous crack, a third segment collapsing outward. Calais' voice, harsh with conflict, cut through the din. Threat origin roof sector Delta 9. Neutralization required. Lion grabbed the rim of the hatch, looked straight at her, and poured every ounce of command he possessed into his hand. Single plea. "I need you here. Kellis, please." The word please seemed to strike like lightning. Her eyes widened. The red lines across her cheeks flickered in frantic patterns. Somewhere inside her, cold directives collided with a new, fragile will born of whispered thanks and stolen music. The floor under her boots splintered, lurching toward void. She chose. She sprang, armor plates glinting, and seized Lion's wrist the instant the crystal beneath her shattered entirely. For one terrifying moment they dangled over the abyss, tethered only by her grip and his fingers on the hatch edge. Her strength hauled him downward. They tumbled into the shaft as the final span disintegrated above, sunlight and shards roaring past like a broken waterfall. Their fall became a grinding slide along magnetic pipes, sparks spitting where her armor scraped metal. She twisted mid-air to cage him with her body, absorbing brutal impacts until an emergency grate halted them with a bone-rattling slam. Dust swirled in flashlight blue gloom. Somewhere high above, alarms faded into strained silence. Lion's vision swam, ribs aching. Kellis's arms were still around him, trembling with adrenaline. He heard her breathing, no longer the silent rhythm of a practiced killer, but the ragged pull of someone alive and afraid. For long seconds neither spoke. At last she whispered. Voice cracked. Primary directive failure. Asset unsafe. He touched the back of her glove, gentle. You saved me. That is all that matters. Her markings glowed, then dimmed, cycling through an unreadable pattern like a heart learning. A new beat. She withdrew slightly, eyes searching his, and asked, almost too softly to hear, Why did you call me Kellis on the bridge? He managed a weary smile. Because it is your name. Footsteps rang on distant metal Imperial guards converging on the conduit. Kellis pushed herself upright, muscles stiff, but when she addressed the coming soldiers, her voice had changed. It held command of her station, yet also a tremor of personal claim. Envoy secure. Locate sniper at Delta 9. Capture alive. The guards obeyed without question, perhaps sensing the shift as keenly as Lion did. As they escorted him through maintenance passages back toward medical screening, Kellis did not resume the old 5-pace distance. She walked beside him, shoulder almost brushing his. Lion, bruised but unbroken, realized the fracture on the crystal. Span had done more than threaten his life. It had cracked the invisible wall inside the Imperial weapon's mind. Hours later, confined to his chambers for safety, Lion replayed the moment her fingers brushed his by the hatch, the way she had. Spoken his name equal parts warning and plea. Outside the reinforced doors he sensed her presence like a silent wildfire, no longer mere shadow. Somewhere beyond, power struggles raged. Who built the sabotage? Who wished peace to fail? But under those politics ran a quieter, stronger current. Kellis Varen had stepped off the path written for her. And in tomorrow's council, when generals blustered and empresses tested loyalties, a single unexpected variable would stand at Lion's side, not because code demanded it, but because choice, fragile and new, had taken root in the cracks. The palace burned, not with flame, but with tension. After the sabotage, every hallway buzzed with whispers and suspicion. The treaty was frozen, talks suspended under the excuse of security reevaluation. But everyone knew the truth. Someone powerful wanted the peace talks dead. Lion sat at his window, looking over the glittering city below, yet his thoughts kept circling Kellis. She hadn't left his side since the fall. She didn't speak much, but she stood closer now, not 5 paces behind, but beside him. He could feel the difference in her. Something had shifted, something no one could reverse. Kellis had been silent for most of the morning. Then, without warning, she said, They will come for you today. Her voice was quiet, steady. They want the treaty broken. Lion nodded. Will they come for you too? He asked. She turned to him, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They'll expect me to choose duty. But I already made my choice. Before he could answer, the door opened and a royal messenger summoned them both. Empress Risa demanded Lion's presence in the high court, and Kellis was to escort him officially, to ensure his safety. Unofficially, every step felt like walking into a trap. The high court was full when they arrived. Gold and crimson robes filled the tiered balconies. General Talvik stood near the throne, arms crossed, his expression cold and unshaken. Risa sat tall, hands steepled, gaze unreadable. Lion stood before them, feeling the pressure of 1,000 eyes. He could almost hear Kellis breathe behind him, steady as always. Risa addressed the court in a voice that echoed with iron. An attempt was made on the envoy's life, in our house. On sacred ground, he survived. But we have yet to know who within this chamber betrayed that trust. Before anyone else could speak, Lion took a step forward. I have evidence, he said clearly. Communications intercepted from the bridge's security network. Logs erased, reprogrammed by a system only accessible to senior command. A ripple moved through the audience. Talvik stepped forward, his voice full of disbelief. You accuse me? He spat. You dare? Lion didn't blink. I have proof. You ensured Callus's protocol would prioritize target elimination over my protection. You calculated that she would hesitate long enough for the bridge to fall. Talvik reached for his sidearm, a foolish move in a court discarded. But before he could draw it, Callus moved. She wasn't a blur this time. She was flame and grace, each movement deliberate, each strike a question answered. In 3 steps, she disarmed him, twisted his arm, and brought him to his knees with nothing more than her momentum and certainty. Her expression was calm, but her voice cut like glass. You used me. She turned to Risa, holding the general in place. You made me a weapon, and you told me silence was strength, but I am more than the silence. The court gasped as she faced the Empress directly. You said never speak, but I have spoken. You said never feel, but I have felt. You made me perfect, so I would never choose. But I choose now. Risa stood slowly, her face unreadable. Her voice came soft and cold. And what do you choose? Callus Varane? Callus looked at Lion, then back to her mother. I choose peace. I choose to protect, not because I must, but because I want to. I choose to build something stronger than fear. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Risa sat down and gave a single nod. Then go build it, she said. Talvik was arrested. The court broke into chaos, but Lion and Callus walked out in quiet. The air outside was heavy with the coming rain. On the steps of the palace, Lion turned to her. You didn't have to? Do that, he said. She tilted her head slightly. I did. You gave me something no one else ever did. Not orders, not commands. You gave me a name. A light rain began to fall, soft and steady. He reached out and took her hand, no hesitation this time. Her fingers curled around his, warm, steady. What happens now? He asked. She looked up at the sky, as if tasting the answer in the yasa. Air, now we rebuild, she said, but not just alliances. We rebuild who we are. They worked together in the months that followed, not as diplomat and protector, but as equals. Calais took a place on the joint council that managed the disputed wormhole routes. She was no longer a shadow behind Lion, but a voice beside him. The galaxy took notice. The story spread of the weapon, who chose grace over power, who found fire and compassion rather than conquest. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a warning. But for those who believed in change, it was a beginning dot and one quiet evening. Long after the last vote was cast, and the chambers were empty, Lion returned to the same high window where his journey began. Callus stood beside him. Music played. Softly in the background, a Terrancello, slow and full of sorrowful joy. She listened with eyes closed, and when she opened them, they held something he'd never seen before. Peace, you've changed, he said gently. She gave the faintest smile. No, she said. I just stopped pretending I hadn't. And there, under the soft sound of rain and music, with their hands entwined and the stars beyond the window, the weapon and the diplomat stood not as symbols, but as people whole, flawed, and finally free.